Admiral Vextar leaned back in his command chair, the blue glow of the holographic display casting shadows across his reptilian features. The intelligence reports floating before him were almost too amusing to take seriously. Small bipedal creatures, called humans, had somehow managed to spread across a dozen star systems near the edge of the galaxy. Their ships looked like scrap metal held together with hope and determination. "Look at this pathetic excuse for a starship," Vextar said, zooming in on an image of a human vessel. The craft appeared to be built from different pieces welded together, with mismatched hull plating and weapons that seemed bolted on as an afterthought. "They call this thing a warship? My personal shuttle has better armor." Commander Rathel stepped closer to examine the display, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. His yellow eyes gleamed with the same arrogance that had carried the Corvani Empire through countless victories. "Sir, our analysts believe these humans have been expanding for less than 2 centuries. They're practically infants compared to our 3,000-year civilization." The war room filled with the low rumbling that passed for laughter among the Corvani elite. Officers gathered around the display, pointing at various human technologies with the kind of condescending amusement reserved for children's toys. Their plasma cannons looked crude, their shield generators appeared outdated by Empire standards by at least 500 years, and their faster-than-light drives seemed barely capable of interstellar travel. The biological scans are even more amusing, continued Rathel, pulling up medical data on human physiology. No natural armor plating like the Zenthari, no acid resistance like the Melody, no enhanced reflexes like the Quillian warriors. They're soft, slow, and fragile. One of our standard plasma rifles could probably kill 3 of them with a single shot. Vextar studied the human colony layouts displayed on the tactical screen. Their defensive positions were laughably predictable, following outdated military doctrine that the Empire had encountered and crushed centuries ago. The humans had arranged their orbital platforms in a classic defensive grid, exactly the kind of formation that Corvani battle tactics were designed to overwhelm within minutes. Intelligence suggests they have approximately 40 million individuals spread across these systems, reported Science Officer Colnith, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone discussing livestock numbers. Their population growth is rapid, but their military training appears minimal. Most of their vessels are operated by civilians with basic combat training. The Admiral's communication console chimed softly, displaying the official conquest order from the Empire's High Command. The document was routine, almost boring in its standardized language. Survey the target species, evaluate resistance potential, execute standard subjugation protocols, integrate survivors into the Empire's labor force. It was the same order he had received 831 times before. "Gentlemen, ladies," Vextar announced to his gathered officers, "prepare the 47th Conquest Armada. We depart in 6 cycles for what promises to be the most routine operation of our careers. I expect total victory within 1 standard day, possibly less if these humans prove as weak as they appear." The officers dispersed to their duties, already planning how they would spend their conquest bonuses. None of them bothered to read the final paragraph of the intelligence report, buried beneath dozens of pages of technical specifications and tactical assessments. The paragraph mentioned something about humans having an unusual approach to warfare, something about their willingness to sacrifice themselves in ways that defied logical military doctrine. But why would the mighty Corvani Empire need to worry about the desperate acts of a dying species? As the war room emptied, Admiral Vextar remained at his console, reviewing the battle plans one final time. Everything was perfect, calculated, inevitable. The humans would surrender after the first demonstration of Corvani firepower, just like every other species had done. By this time next week, humanity would be just another footnote in the Empire's glorious history of conquest. He had no way of knowing that he was about to encounter something the Empire had never faced before, a species that didn't just fight to win, but fought to ensure their enemies would remember them forever. The Corvani Armada dropped out of hyperspace like a wall of death approaching New Horizon. 47 massive warships materialized in perfect formation, their dark hulls stretching for kilometers in every direction. Each vessel was a testament to the Empire's engineering prowess, bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached in 1,000 battles. Fleet Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal. Dominion, watching the human colony grow larger on the main display. The planet below looked peaceful, almost quaint, with its scattered cities and orbital installations that seemed barely capable of supporting interplanetary trade, let alone military defense. "Sir, we're receiving standard greeting transmissions from the colony," reported Communications Officer Velkan, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "They're welcoming us to their system and asking if we need assistance with navigation or supplies." Vextar's officers exchanged glances. In their experience, most species either fled in terror or immediately began broadcasting surrender terms when faced with an Imperial armada. These humans were actually offering to help them. "How wonderfully naive," chuckled Commander Rathel. "They probably think we're here for a diplomatic visit." Science Officer Kolneth continued her scans, her instruments painting a detailed picture of human capabilities. "Biological analysis confirms all previous reports, sir. Average human height is 1.7 meters, average weight is 70 kilograms. Their bone structure is remarkably fragile compared to most spacefaring species. No natural weapons, no enhanced healing abilities, no environmental adaptations beyond basic temperature regulation." The tactical display showed New Horizons' defenses in embarrassing detail. A dozen orbital platforms hung in geosynchronous orbit, their weapon signatures barely registering on Corvani sensors. Several patrol craft moved between the platforms in lazy patterns that suggested their crews were probably bored rather than alert. "Those aren't military vessels," observed Weapons Officer Turnal, highlighting the human ships on the display. "Half of them are converted cargo haulers. Look at this one, it's got mining equipment still attached to its hull." Vextar studied the human defenses with the eye of a professional warrior. The orbital platforms were positioned to defend against pirates or small raiders, not a full Imperial conquest fleet. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams, the kind of armament that might scratch the paint on a Corvani destroyer if they were lucky. "Update the conquest timeline," Vextar ordered. "These humans are even less prepared than our worst estimates suggested." Kolneth's fingers danced across her console, running calculations based on the new data. "Revised estimate, sir. Complete. Orbital superiority in 23 minutes. Ground forces can begin landing operations in 45 minutes. Total system pacification, 1 hour and 7 minutes. The bridge crew began their pre-battle preparations with the casual efficiency of professionals handling a routine task. Weapons officers charged their plasma arrays, tactical officers plotted approach vectors, and communications specialists prepared the standard surrender demand broadcast in 17 different languages. On the main screen, New Horizon continued its peaceful rotation, unaware that its inhabitants had less than 2 hours of freedom remaining. The human ships continued their patrols, their crews probably enjoying what they thought was another quiet day protecting their homes and families. Admiral Vextar felt something unusual, a tiny pang of sympathy for these creatures who were about to learn that the galaxy was far more dangerous than they had imagined. In a few hours, this system would become Imperial territory. Its resources would flow to the Empire's coffers, and its people would serve as laborers in the vast machine of Corvani expansion. "Begin the approach," he commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of absolute power. "Signal all ships to assume standard conquest formation, and someone prepare the surrender terms. Make sure they're translated into whatever primitive language these humans use." As the Armada began its final approach toward New Horizon, none of the Corvani officers bothered to notice that the human patrol ships weren't running away. In fact, they seemed to be moving into some kind of formation of their own. The alarm systems across the Corvani flagship began screaming as dozens of new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Admiral Vextar leaned forward in his command chair, squinting at the sensor readings that seemed to make no sense. The human defense fleet was emerging from behind asteroids, from the shadow of New Horizons' moons, and even from what appeared to be empty space. "Sensor malfunction?" he asked, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew that wasn't the case. The human ships were unlike anything in the Empire's vast database of conquered vessels. They looked like they had been built in scrapyards, by people who had never seen a proper starship blueprint. Some appeared to be cargo haulers with weapon turrets bolted onto their hulls. Others looked like passenger ships with their luxury compartments ripped out and replaced with missile launchers. One vessel seemed to be nothing more than an industrial mining platform with engines strapped to the back. "Sir, these ships, they don't match any known design patterns," reported sensor operator Nixal, her voice filled with confusion. "Some of them are broadcasting civilian identification codes, but they're armed with military-grade weapons," Captain Dongmin commanded. The human vessel Broken Arrow, a former grain transport that had been hastily converted into a warship. His crew of 37 included farmers, mechanics, teachers, and shopkeepers who had volunteered when the call went out for defenders. None of them were professional soldiers, but all of them understood what would happen to their families if the Corvani Empire succeeded. "All stations, this is Dongmin," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We knew this day might come. Remember, we're not trying to win a glorious victory here. We're trying to make these invaders pay such a high price that they'll think twice before attacking another human world." The Broken Arrow accelerated toward the nearest Corvani destroyer, its mismatched engines pushing the converted freighter to speeds that should have torn the ship apart. The destroyer's weapons officer, following standard Imperial doctrine, began targeting the human vessel's engines and weapons systems, intending to disable rather than destroy it. But Dongmin had no intention of being captured or disabled. He pushed his ship's engines beyond their safety limits, ignoring the warning alarms that filled the bridge with their urgent wailing. The Broken Arrow charged straight into the destroyer's firing solution, taking hit after hit as it's improvised. Armor plating melted under the assault. "Hull breach on decks 3 through 7, reported his engineer, young Hyojin, who was barely out of technical school. "Engine core is at critical temperature, sir. How long do we have?" Dongmin asked, his hands steady on the controls as plasma bolts tore chunks from his ship. "Maybe 2 minutes before total failure," she replied. "Then we make them count," he said, targeting the destroyer's engine section, the Corvani crew aboard. The destroyer watched in horror as the human ship refused to break off its attack run. Their tactical computers had calculated that the human vessel should have been destroyed or disabled by now. Yet it kept coming, weapons firing, even as sections of its hull peeled away like burning paper. In its final moments, as the Broken Arrow's reactor began to overload, Dongmin made one last course correction. His dying ship slammed into the destroyer's engine housing, and the combined explosion from both vessels lit up the space around New Horizon like a second sun. "Report!" shouted Admiral Vextar as his flagship shook from the shockwave. "The destroyer, Relentless Claw, is dead in space, sir," Tactical Officer Kemdar replied, his voice shaking. "The human vessel. It deliberately rammed our ship while its reactor was overloading. They used their own destruction as a weapon." Before Vextar could process this information, 3 more human ships began their own suicide runs against different targets in the Imperial formation. The freighter Lucky Star, commanded by Captain Su Young, took out a cruiser's weapon array. The mining ship Deep Prospector, under Captain Min Seok, crippled a destroyer's shields before exploding. Each human vessel fought with the same terrifying determination, their crews singing over the radio as they died. "Sir?" whispered Commander Rathel, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. "They're not trying to win. They're trying to hurt us as much as possible before they die." Admiral Vextar realized he was facing something the Empire had never encountered before. An enemy that viewed their own deaths not as defeat, but as victory, as long as they could drag their enemies down with them. The space around New Horizon suddenly filled with more ships than Admiral Vextar's sensors could track. They appeared from every direction, behind asteroids, from the outer planets, even from what looked like empty space where they had been drifting with their engines off. The human reinforcements didn't arrive in neat military formations like every other species the Empire had conquered. Instead, they came in wild, seemingly random groups that somehow moved together like a pack of hunting animals. "Sir, we're detecting over 200 new contacts," reported sensor operator Nixel, her voice rising with each new ship that appeared on the display. "But these aren't military vessels. I'm seeing cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining barges, even what appears to be civilian racing ships. Captain Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of the Defiant Dawn, watching the Corvani fleet through his ship's cracked viewscreen. His vessel had once carried grain between agricultural worlds, but now its cargo holds were filled with missiles scrounged from a dozen different sources. The ship's hull was a patchwork of repairs and modifications, with weapon turrets welded onto mounting points that had never been designed for combat. "This is Defiant Dawn to all Harvest Squadron ships," Hyun-woo broadcast to the 12 converted freighters following his lead. "The enemy's left flank is pulling back to regroup. We're going to hit them before they can reorganize their formation." His communications officer, So-jin, looked up from her console with concern. "Captain, we're getting massive energy readings from those Empire ships. Their weapons could cut through our entire squadron in seconds." "Then we better make sure they don't get seconds," Hyun-woo replied, pushing his ship's engines to maximum power. The Defiant Dawn led its improvised squadron in a spiraling attack pattern that no military academy would have taught. The converted freighters scattered and regrouped, used their own cargo containers as improvised shields, and coordinated their movements through a combination of tight beam communications and hand signals visible through their viewports on the EE. Other side of the battle, Captain Yun-soo commanded a group of mining vessels that had been hastily armed with their own drilling equipment. The massive industrial lasers designed to cut through asteroids were surprisingly effective against starship hulls, especially when the mining ships worked together to focus their beams on single targets. "Mining Group 7 to all ships," Yun-soo transmitted as her vessel, the Rockbreaker, unleashed its modified drilling laser on a Corvani cruiser's shield array. "Target their power coupling points. Same technique we use on tough asteroid cores. Find the weak spots and keep hammering them." The Corvani officers watched in growing bewilderment as the human tactics defied every principle of space combat they had learned. Human ships would deliberately ram into each other to change course at impossible angles. They used their own destroyed vessels as cover, hiding behind the wreckage of their friends to get closer to Empire targets. Some human ships even ejected their cargo holds full of scrap metal, creating debris clouds that disrupted Corvani sensor arrays and weapon targeting systems. "Pattern 7 Alpha, all ships," Hyun-woo announced calmly as plasma bolts tore through his ship's forward hull. His vessel was dying around him, atmosphere venting from a dozen breaches, but his voice remained steady. "Remember, we're not here to survive. We're here to make them remember us. Every second we keep them busy is another second for our families to prepare." The Defiant Dawn continued its attack run even as its engines began to fail. Hyun-woo's crew of volunteers, teachers, farmers, shopkeepers, who had never fired a weapon in anger before this day, worked frantically to keep their improvised weapons functioning. When their missile launchers jammed, they physically pushed the missiles out of the cargo bay. When their energy weapons overloaded, they rerouted power through the ship's life support systems. Admiral Vextar found himself facing something that challenged every assumption about warfare that the Empire had developed over 3,000 years of conquest. These humans weren't just willing to die. They were using their deaths as tactical weapons, creating chaos and destruction that their individually weak ships should never have been able to achieve. "Sir," Commander Rathel reported, his voice filled with disbelief, "we've lost 8 ships and suffered critical damage to 12 more. Against cargo haulers and mining equipment, the Empire was learning that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the best weapons, but the one with nothing left to lose." The battle had been raging for over an hour when Admiral Vextar noticed something that made his blood run cold. The human ships weren't just fighting desperately. They were learning. With each passing minute, their attacks became more effective, their targeting more precise, and their tactics more coordinated. It was as if the entire human fleet was one giant organism adapting to survive. Engineer Yoonji crawled through the twisted wreckage of the Resilient Hope's cargo bay, her hands covered in burns from handling live power cables. Around her, a team of mechanics and technicians worked frantically to connect a Corvani plasma cannon they had salvaged from a destroyed enemy fighter to their ship's main power system. "This is completely insane," muttered her assistant Minho, watching sparks fly from the improvised connections. "We're trying to hook alien technology into our power grid using cargo straps and industrial adhesive." "Insane is exactly what we need right now," Yunji replied, running diagnostic cables between the alien weapon and their ship's targeting computer. "The Empire expects us to fight by their rules, using their understanding of warfare. But we don't have to play by anyone's rules." The Corvani plasma cannon was 3 times larger than anything the Resilient Hope had been designed to carry. Its energy requirements were massive. Its power output was completely outside human safety standards, and its alien control systems were written in a language none of them could read. But Yunji and her team had been fixing impossible problems their entire careers. "Power coupling is unstable," reported Junior Engineer Kyung-ho, his voice tight with concentration as he manually held 2 incompatible connectors together. "The energy feedback is going to fry our entire electrical system if we're not careful." "Then we won't be careful," Yunji said, activating the jury-rigged weapon system. "We'll be fast." The improvised plasma cannon drew power from every system. On the ship, lights dimmed, life support systems strained, and the artificial gravity flickered as massive amounts of energy flowed through connections that had never been designed to handle such loads. Warning alarms screamed throughout the ship as safety systems registered readings that should have been impossible. On the bridge, Captain Taemin watched his instruments go crazy as his engineering team performed their miracle in the cargo bay. "Gunji, whatever you're doing back there, it's showing up on every sensor array within a light minute. You've basically turned our ship into a giant beacon." "Good," came her reply over the communication system. "That means the Empire is about to learn something new about human engineering." The Resilient Hope turned toward the nearest Corvani cruiser, its improvised weapon system charging with a sound like controlled thunder. The alien plasma cannon, now powered by human determination and connected to human targeting systems, prepared to fire its first and probably last shot when the weapon discharged. It created a beam of energy that was visible across the entire battlefield. The plasma bolt struck the Corvani cruiser's shields with the force of a small star, overloading the alien defensive systems and punching through the ship's armor like it was made of paper. The cruiser's entire left side erupted in explosions as its internal systems overloaded, but the improvised weapon system couldn't handle the energy output. The Corvani plasma cannon exploded, taking most of the Resilient Hope's cargo bay with it. Half the ship was instantly vaporized, and the surviving crew had less than 2 minutes before their life support failed completely. "Did we get them?" Man Ho asked, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead as he struggled to read the damaged sensor displays. "We got them," Yunji confirmed, watching the Corvani cruiser drift helplessly with its engines dead and its weapon systems offline. "And now every human ship in the fleet knows exactly what frequency their shields operate on." Across the battlefield, other human vessels were conducting their own desperate experiments. The mining ship Deep Strike had welded Corvani hull plating onto its drilling equipment, creating hybrid weapons that could punch through Empire armor. The transport Flying Hope had reprogrammed captured Corvani targeting computers to work with human missile systems, dramatically improving their accuracy. Admiral Vex Tar watched in growing horror as his technologically superior fleet was gradually picked apart by enemies who were literally inventing new ways to fight as the battle progressed. The humans weren't just brave or desperate. They were creative in ways that the Empire's rigid military doctrine couldn't counter. "Sir," reported his chief science officer, her voice shaking, "the humans are sharing their innovations across their entire fleet in real time. Every breakthrough one ship makes is immediately transmitted to all the others." The Empire was facing an enemy that turned every defeat into a lesson and every small victory into a template for greater success. The communication channels across the Corvani fleet suddenly filled with something that Admiral Vex Tar had never heard in 3 decades of conquest: laughter. Not the bitter, defeated laughter of broken enemies, but genuine amusement, as if the humans were enjoying themselves in the middle of what should have been their annihilation. "Attention Corvani fleet, this is the Dancing Bear," came a cheerful voice over the main communication frequency. "We're a converted passenger liner with a bunch of accountants and school teachers pretending to be soldiers. Just wanted to let you know we're having a blast out here. literally in about 30 seconds when our reactor overloads. Communications Officer Velkan looked up from his console in confusion. Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. Not distress calls or surrender offers. They're actually making jokes. Captain Subin sat in the command chair of the Lucky Strike, a former luxury yacht that had been hastily converted into a warship. Her crew of 15 included her own teenage daughter Ji Young, who was operating the targeting systems with the same concentration she once applied to video games. The ship was falling apart around them, hit by plasma bolts that had melted through their improvised armor. But somehow they kept fighting. "Mom, the Corvani destroyer is trying to lock onto us with their tractor beam," Ji Young reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Well, that's convenient," Subin replied, pushing her ship's engines to maximum power. "Saves us the trouble of having to chase them down." She opened a channel to the Corvani flagship. "This is Captain Subin of the Lucky Strike. Thanks for the target practice, Admiral. Sorry, we're only going to get one shot at this." The Lucky Strike accelerated directly toward the destroyer that was trying to capture it, using the alien tractor beam to increase its own speed. The Corvani crew aboard, the destroyer watched in horror as their attempt to capture the human ship turned into a guided missile attack. "Impact in 15 seconds, Ji Young announced calmly. "Should we put on some music for this?" "Absolutely," her mother replied. "Something with a good beat." The speakers throughout the Lucky Strike began playing an old human song about never giving up, the music broadcasting across all frequencies so that every ship in the battle could hear it. As the converted yacht smashed into the destroyer's hull, the song continued playing even as both ships exploded in a ball of fire. Across the battlefield, other human crews were conducting their own forms of psychological warfare. The crew of the Stubborn Mule was broadcasting a running commentary of their battle like it was a sports event, complete with jokes about their own terrible marksmanship and complaints about the quality of their improvised weapons. "This is Chief Engineer Wansik aboard the Stubborn Mule," came one transmission. "Our port-side missile launcher just exploded, taking out our kitchen and the laundry room. On the bright side, we don't have to worry about washing our clothes anymore since we'll probably all be dead in about 5 minutes." The Corvani crews, trained for centuries to face enemies who begged for mercy or died in terrified silence, found themselves completely unprepared for opponents who cracked jokes about their own deaths. Several Empire vessels reported their crews refusing to engage at close range, not out of tactical caution, but because they were psychologically disturbed by the human behavior. "Sir," reported Commander Rathel, his voice shaking, "the humans are broadcasting what appears to be a recipe for baked goods while ramming our cruiser Merciless Talon. They're singing," whispered Weapons Officer Turnal, staring at his communications display in disbelief. "The crew of that transport ship is singing children's songs while their ship is being torn apart by our plasma cannons." Admiral Vextar watched the tactical display as another human ship began its final attack run, its crew harmonizing on some ancient human ballad about sailing into dangerous waters. The song continued even as the ship's hull cracked and atmosphere vented into space, the crew singing until their final breath. "What kind of species laughs at death?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to his officers. The answer came from Captain Mayong-su of the Eternal Optimist, whose ship was missing half its hull but still fighting. "The kind that knows something you don't, Admiral. We're not dying here today. We're teaching the galaxy that humans don't break. We bend, we adapt, we laugh at impossible odds, and we make sure that everyone who fights us remembers the experience, the us." Human laughter echoing across the communication channels was having an effect that no weapon could achieve. It was breaking the Corvani Empire's confidence in their own invincibility. Admiral Vextar stared at the tactical display, his scaled, hands trembling as he counted the losses. 26 capital ships destroyed, 15 more drifting helplessly with their engines dead, and their crews either dead or dying. The remaining vessels were scattered across the battlefield, their formations broken, their crews demoralized by an enemy that seemed to find joy in their own destruction. In 3,000 years of Corvani expansion, no admiral had ever faced this situation. The Empire simply didn't retreat. They conquered, they dominated, they absorbed new territories and species into their vast civilization. The concept of withdrawal was so foreign that the Corvani language barely had words for it. "Sir," Commander Rathul said quietly, "we're receiving distress signals from 8 more ships. The humans have somehow turned that cargo hauler into a guided missile that's targeting our command vessel." Through the main view screen, Vextar watched a human transport ship, probably a civilian vessel that had been hauling food or manufactured goods just hours earlier, accelerate toward his flagship. Its hull was breached in dozens of places, atmosphere streaming out like tears, but it kept coming with the determination of a predator that had caught the scent of blood. "Activate emergency protocols," Vextar ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Prepare for strategic withdrawal." The words tasted like poison in his mouth. No Corvani admiral in recorded history had ever spoken those words. The Empire expanded, always expanded, consuming everything in its path like a cosmic storm that had been raging for millennia. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the remaining human vessels," reported sensor operator Nixal. "They appear to be coordinating for a final assault on our position." Vextar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. In a few minutes, he would either be dead or become the first Corvani admiral to surrender. Both options were equally unthinkable. "Open a channel," he commanded, his voice cracking. "All frequencies. Emergency diplomatic protocols." The communication officer's hands hesitated over the controls. "Sir, we don't have diplomatic protocols for this situation. The Empire has never—" "Open the channel," Vextar repeated. "And this—" Time his voice carried the authority of desperation rather than confidence. The channel opened with a soft chime, and suddenly the bridge was filled with the sound of human voices. Not the screams of terror or pleas for mercy that usually filled the final moments of a conquest, but calm, professional military communications mixed with what sounded like casual conversation. "Human vessels," Vextar began, the words feeling strange and wrong in his mouth. "This is Admiral Vextar of the Corvani Empire. We request terms for withdrawal." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any weapon the humans had deployed. For 30 seconds, the only sound was the hum of damaged systems and the distant explosions of dying ships. Then a voice responded, calm and clear. "This is Commander Tae Hyun aboard the Indomitable. Admiral, may I ask why you came to our system?" Tae Hyun sat in the command chair of what had once been a luxury cruise ship, now converted into the human fleet's flagship. Around him, his bridge crew, mostly civilians who had volunteered when the call went out for defenders, monitored their systems with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to be soldiers in the span of a few hours. "To claim this system for the Empire," Vextar replied, the traditional response coming automatically. "It is our way. We expand, we conquer, we bring order to the galaxy." "I see," Tae Hyun said, and there was something in his voice that made every Corvani officer on the bridge feel suddenly cold. "And how many systems have you conquered using these methods, Admiral?" 1,247, Vextar answered, though he wasn't sure why he was being so honest with an enemy commander. "And how many species have you enslaved or eliminated in the process?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Vextar found himself thinking of worlds he had conquered, of species that had begged for mercy, of civilizations that had been absorbed into the Empire's vast machine of expansion and exploitation. "Then you understand," Tae Hyun said, his voice carrying a certainty that was more frightening than any threat. "Why we can't let you leave to warn the others. You've just told me that you're part of a machine that destroys entire civilizations. Why would we allow that machine to continue operating?" The human commander's words struck Vextar like a physical blow. He had expected negotiation, perhaps demands for tribute or territory. Instead, he was facing an enemy who understood exactly what the Empire represented and had already decided that it could not be allowed to continue. Commander Tae Hyun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the scattered remains of the Corvani fleet through his cracked viewscreen. Around him, the space near New Horizon was filled with debris from both human and alien ships, a graveyard of metal and dreams that told the story of the most unlikely military victory in galactic history. His communications officer, Young A, looked up from her console with confusion. "Sir, we have the Empire fleet completely surrounded. Their weapons are offline, their engines are damaged, and they have no way to escape. Why aren't we finishing them off? Tae-hyun was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display that showed the remaining 17 Corvani vessels clustered together like wounded animals. His fleet had paid a terrible price for this victory. Over 200 human ships destroyed, thousands of brave volunteers dead, entire families wiped out in the span of a few hours. Because dead admirals can't deliver messages, he finally replied. He opened a channel to the Corvani flagship, where Admiral Vextar waited in what he clearly expected to be his final moments. The alien commander's voice was hollow, defeated, but still carried traces of the arrogance that had driven his species to conquer over 1,000 worlds. "Commander Tae-hyun, I do not understand your tactics," Vextar transmitted. "You have won. Why do you not finish what you started?" "Because this battle was never about winning or losing," Tae-hyun replied, his voice carrying across every frequency so that every surviving crew member on both sides could hear his words. "This was about sending a message, and messages are only useful if someone survives to deliver them." On Earth, 12 light-years away, Defense Minister Junho was already implementing humanity's response to the Corvani invasion. Every shipyard in human space had been converted to military production. Every mining operation had been redirected to provide raw materials for weapons and vessels. Every civilian with technical skills had been recruited into the largest military mobilization effort the galaxy had ever witnessed. "Tell your empire," Tae-hyun continued, his words being recorded by every communications array in the system, "that Earth remembers every world you've conquered. We know about the Zenthari homeworld, where you enslaved an entire species of artists and philosophers. We know about the Aquilan colonies, where you destroyed 3 civilizations that had lived in peace for over 1,000 years. We know about the hegemony worlds, where you committed genocide against anyone who refused to submit to your rule." Admiral Vextar felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized the implications of the human commander's words. These weren't just random threats. The humans had detailed intelligence about Empire operations across the galaxy. They knew about worlds that had been conquered centuries before humanity had even developed space travel. "We're coming to give them back," Tae-hyun said, and the certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any weapon. "Not because we're conquerors like you, but because someone needs to remind the galaxy that bullies eventually meet someone who fights back." The surviving Corvani ships began their retreat, their engines struggling to achieve the minimum velocity needed for hyperspace jump. As they prepared to flee, every crew member aboard those vessels carried with them the memory of humans who had laughed while dying, who had turned their own deaths into weapons, and who had somehow managed to defeat the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, using nothing but determination and creativity. Admiral Vextar's final transmission from the New Horizon system would become the most significant communication in Corvani history. For the first time in 3 millennia, an Empire admiral was broadcasting a retreat order, sending word back to every occupied world that the unstoppable expansion of their civilization had finally encountered something it couldn't overcome. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Commander Tae-hyun watched the alien ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying with them news that would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Soon, every enslaved species would know that somewhere out there was a civilization that had looked at the mighty Corvani Empire and decided to fight back. The names of the heroes who had died at New Horizon, Captain Hyun-woo of the Defiant Dawn, Engineer Yoonji of the Resilient Hope, Captain Subin and her daughter Ji-young of the Lucky Strike, would become legends whispered in slave quarters and resistance cells across 1,000 worlds. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. And the Empire would never be the same. The age of unopposed conquest was over, and the age of liberation had begun.